The quiet suburban street was supposed to be safe. HOA rules, manicured lawns, and watchful neighbors. But last night, safety shattered. A self-appointed HOA cop stormed up to my driveway, screaming about a parking violation. My wife, still in her gym clothes, calmly tried to explain. Then he reached under his jacket and pulled a gun. What he didn't know, what almost no one in this neighborhood knows, is that my wife isn't just some military spouse. She's Delta Force, still active, still dangerous. And when the safety clicked off his pistol, the clock started ticking on his life. Because the wrong man just picked the wrong woman, and she doesn't need permission to end a threat. The first thing I noticed was the crunch of boots on gravel. Not the casual shuffle of a neighbor taking out trash, but a deliberate, heavy stride, like someone walking with a mission. I was upstairs in my office, tapping away at some overdue reports, when the noise made me glance out the window. The sun was dipping behind the rooftops. The neighborhood bathed in that orange glow that makes everything look calmer than it really is. That illusion didn't last. Down in the driveway, my wife, Claire, was bent over the trunk of her car, hauling in groceries. Even in a baggy sweatshirt and yoga pants, she moved with that easy efficiency I'd seen in the field, though no one else here would ever guess. To these people, she's just a quiet, polite woman who waves from across the street. The man walking toward her wasn't from across the street. I didn't recognize him. Black baseball cap pulled low, dark jacket, clipboard in one hand. He had that kind of posture, spine locked, shoulders puffed, that told you he enjoyed authority, even if it was self-appointed. I cracked the window just in time to hear him bark something. Claire froze, one hand still on the trunk. She turned her head slightly, scanning him the way she scans rooms when we're out in public, not paranoid, just aware, like she's mapping exits and threats without thinking. I said, "You can't park here overnight." The man snapped. His voice carried that ugly mixture of condescension and faux official tone. Claire straightened slowly, resting both hands casually on the edge of the trunk. Her voice, calm and measured, drifted up to me. "This is my driveway." The man took 2 steps closer, chest out. "It's in violation of HOA Code 24. No non-garage vehicles overnight. I've been patrolling and..." "Patrolling?" Claire cut in, not hostile, but with just enough of a raised brow to make the words sound absurd. "Yes," he said, bristling. "I'm the HOA enforcement officer for this block." "We don't have an HOA enforcement officer. We have a volunteer committee that meets once a month and argues about lawn height." Claire glanced toward the street where his SUV sat crooked, one wheel up on the curb, hazard lights flashing. No insignia, no uniform, just a random guy with a clipboard. "I'll move it into the garage once I'm done," she said evenly, turning back toward the trunk. That should have been the end. Instead, he stepped into her space. Too close. I could see the way her shoulders subtly shifted, muscles loosening, feet repositioning. Most people get tense when someone encroaches. She relaxes. "Ready?" "Ma'am," he said, lowering his voice in what I think he thought was intimidation. "If you're going to get smart, we can do this the hard way." From upstairs, my pulse ticked up. I started for the stairs. Claire's reply was calm, almost bored. "Move your car. You're blocking the street." His jaw clenched, and then it happened so fast, I almost doubted what I was seeing. His left hand gripped the clipboard tighter. His right hand slid under his jacket, came out with a black handgun. I stopped cold on the stairs. He didn't point directly at her, yet, but the muzzle was angled low in her direction. "You think you can tell me what to do?" he said, a shaky sort of aggression in his tone. From where I stood, my own fear wasn't that he was aiming. It was that he didn't know who he was dealing with. Claire didn't flinch, not even a millimeter. She let her gaze drop to the weapon for half a heartbeat, then lifted her eyes back to his face like he was holding a TV remote. "You really don't want to do that," she said softly. The air between them thickened. I could see his breathing pick up, the slight tremor in his grip. He was trying to hold on to whatever power he thought he had. I'd seen her in moments like this overseas. That exact stillness. The way she becomes smaller somehow, less threatening, lulling the other person into thinking they're in control, right before she takes it away. The man's head jerked toward the house, as if checking for witnesses, but his eyes skipped right over my window. "Go inside," he ordered. "Now, before this gets bad." Her lips curved in the faintest smile. "You think this is bad?" He blinked, thrown off by the tone. She reached into the trunk, casually moving a grocery bag, giving the impression she was complying, while her weight shifted to the balls of her feet. I knew what was coming, but he didn't. "Last chance," she murmured, not to plead, but to warn. I gripped the banister, torn between charging out there and trusting her. My gut told me if I intervened too soon, it might escalate. With her, escalation didn't mean chaos. It meant precision. But this wasn't a war zone. This was our driveway, and that man was aiming a loaded gun at my wife. Before I could take another step, I heard the faint click of a safety disengaging. It wasn't hers. The sound seemed to echo in the evening air. The neighbor's wind chimes tinkled faintly, absurdly cheerful against the tension. Claire's eyes flickered once toward the street. She calculated angles, distances, stance. All in that blink. I could almost hear her brain working. Then, without warning, she moved. It wasn't explosive at first, just a shift, a step back that looked like retreat. He leaned in, emboldened. That was his mistake. Her left hand shot up, grabbing his gun wrist, twisting sharply inward while her right hand slammed into his forearm. The gun jerked upward, his finger firing around harmlessly into the air with a deafening crack. Birds exploded from the trees. He yelped in shock, his clipboard clattering to the ground. She pivoted, using his own momentum to slam him chest first against the side of the car. The weapon was already in her hand, her other arm pinning him by the neck. From my vantage point, it looked effortless. To him, I'm sure it felt like being hit by a truck. "Here's what's going to happen," she said in that same calm tone, like she was still talking about groceries. "You're going to stay very still. You're going to take a breath. And you're going to pray I let go before the police get here." I was halfway down the stairs now, my own phone in hand. His body went rigid. I was just, he stammered. She tightened her grip, cutting him off. Quiet. The neighborhood was utterly silent except for his ragged breathing. That's when I realized this wasn't over. Not even close. He froze under her grip, as if the cold metal of the car against his cheek had sucked the fight out of him. But I knew better. Men like this, they don't think they're beaten until you take away the last illusion of control. Claire still had his wrist locked, the gun now angled down toward the pavement, her finger nowhere near the trigger. That was deliberate. She wasn't about to give him a reason to call excessive force. She glanced at me as I stepped outside, her eyes telling me without words, "Stay back." I obeyed. His breath was coming fast, panic curling around his voice. You can't just... "You pulled a firearm on a civilian in her own driveway," she said flatly. "That's aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. You understand that." "I'm on patrol," he blurted. "I'm authorized." "There's no such thing as an HOA patrol with authorization to carry," she cut in, her tone still maddeningly calm. "And you're trespassing. That means you're about 30 seconds away from being cuffed and stuffed." Something flickered in his eyes. Fear, yes, but also calculation. The kind that meant he was about to make a stupid choice. And then he did. In one sudden surge, he tried to twist free, pushing back against her. I saw his shoulder tense, the kind of desperate burst that might throw off an untrained person. Claire shifted like water, stepping aside just enough to let his weight over her balance. His face smacked the car door with a hollow thud. His knees buckled, and she had him on the ground before his brain caught up to the pain. Her knee pinned his shoulder blade, the gun still secure in her grip. She'd moved so fast it looked choreographed. I'd seen her take down bigger men in far worse situations, but somehow it was more terrifying here. On a quiet street, under the warm glow of porch lights, with the smell of cut grass in the air. "You're going to lie there," she said, voice low now, "and you're going to listen." He groaned, trying to twist his head to look at her. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Her lips barely curved. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. A man who thinks rules give him power. A man who's never been in a real fight. And a man who made the mistake of pointing a weapon at me." I moved closer, phone still in my hand, ready to call the police. Claire, not yet, she said without looking at me. The HOA cop, or whatever he thought he was, writhed under her knee. This is assault. I'll sue you. She leaned down, her voice almost a whisper in his ear. If you were military, you'd recognize the hold I have you in. If you were law enforcement, you'd never have pulled a weapon without cause. So that means you're neither. Which means the only thing you should be thinking about right now is how lucky you are I'm not finishing what you started. His breathing hitched. That was the switch. I saw it. The exact second bravado turned to something else. The kind of realization that doesn't fade quickly. From somewhere down the street, a dog barked. A light flicked on in a neighbor's window. The world was watching now, in that silent suburban way, peeking from behind blinds and curtains. Get your knee off me, he muttered, his voice cracking. Say please, she said. He hesitated, jaw tight. Say it. Please. She stood in one fluid motion, stepping back just far enough to give him space. He rolled to his side, clutching his arm, eyes darting between her and me. Gun, she said, tossing the weapon toward me without looking. I caught it awkwardly, holding it away from my body like it might bite. He sat up, rubbing his shoulder. I could have you arrested. Claire crouched so they were eye level. Go ahead, call them. But understand this. The moment you do, the police will run your name, your plates, and your firearm serial number. And something tells me at least one of those things isn't going to come back clean. He swallowed hard. That's what I thought. She stood again, her shadow long in the streetlight. Now get in your car, drive away, and pray you never see me again. For a moment, I thought he might still try to save face, say something to reclaim his imaginary authority. But instead, he staggered to his feet, brushing gravel from his pants, and limped toward his SUV. The engine roared to life. He sat there for a second, gripping the wheel, staring straight ahead. Then he drove off, too fast, tires screeching as he turned the corner. The night air seemed to exhale with him gone. I set the gun down on the trunk, heart still pounding in my ears. Claire, what the hell was that? She finally looked at me, her expression unreadable. That, she said, was nothing. I waited for her to elaborate. She didn't. Instead, she started gathering the spilled groceries, sliding them into the trunk like she'd just been interrupted mid-task by a phone call, not an armed confrontation. You need to call the cops, I said. Not yet, she replied. That guy just pulled a gun on you. I know. She shut the trunk with a soft click. And I need to know why before we bring in uniforms. Her tone made it clear she wasn't talking about curiosity. This was mission thinking. Assessment. I took a step closer. You think he'll come back? Her eyes, dark and sharp now, met mine. I think he's already in deeper than we saw tonight. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves. Somewhere, a siren wailed faintly in the distance. She walked past me toward the house, her movements calm again. But I noticed her scanning, subtle sweeps of the eyes at each shadow, each parked car. When she reached the door, she paused and looked back at the street. Tomorrow, she said, we find out who he works for, and why he thought he could get away with that. It wasn't suggestion. It was a promise. The morning came with a sky the color of dull steel, clouds hanging low and heavy, as if the whole neighborhood was bracing for something. Claire was already gone from the bed when I woke, the faint smell of coffee in the air. When I found her in the kitchen, she was at the table with her laptop open, a half-empty mug beside her, and that focused stillness I recognized from mission prep. On the screen was a map of our neighborhood, property lines outlined in pale blue, and a list of HOA board members with grainy headshots. She didn't look up as I approached. 2 names overlap with last night, she said quietly. They matched the SUV's registration block. Not exact, but close enough to be worth digging. You already ran his plates? Of course. She took a sip of coffee. Partial, but enough for a cross-check. The SUV's not in his name. Belongs to a property management company that contracts with guess who? She turned the screen toward me, the HOA's logo glaring back like an accusation. I sat down, the weight of it settling in. So he was sent, or he volunteered. She closed the laptop with a click. Either way, the fact he pulled a weapon means someone gave him permission, or he thought they did. She stood, moving with that same quiet precision, and pulled a small case on the counter. I recognized it instantly, the compact black kit she used overseas. Inside was a slim camera, an audio recorder, and a few other tools that looked ordinary until you knew what they could do. "You're going after him," I said. Her eyes met mine. "We're going to get answers." We left just after 9. The streets were unnervingly calm, lawns perfectly edged, sprinklers ticking in the distance, the same bland perfection that made our neighborhood feel like a movie set. But I could see her cataloging every vehicle, every movement. She didn't head for the HOA office. Instead, she parked a block over from the property management company's storefront, a bland beige building sandwiched between a nail salon and a dry cleaner. From the outside, it looked harmless, but inside we found the SUV. It was parked in the back lot, half hidden behind a dumpster. She pulled her phone, snapped a few photos, then led me to a side alley where we had a clear view of the rear door. "Wait here," she said. "Claire, wait." Her tone wasn't cold, but it was final. I stayed in the alley while she crossed the street, slipping inside with the ease of someone who could be invisible when she wanted to. Through the glass, I saw her smile at the receptionist, say something that made the woman laugh, then disappear down a hallway. 15 minutes passed. I was about to text her when the back door eased open and she stepped out, slipping a small folder into her jacket. We walked back to the car without speaking. Only when we were inside did she open the folder. Inside were printed emails, a copy of an incident report, and a photo clipped to the corner. It was him, the HOA cop from last night. His name was Marcus Dean, and according to the incident report, he was listed as Neighborhood Safety Liaison. "Not a real job," she said, flipping through the pages. "It's a title they made up. No training, no certification. Just a cover to intimidate residents." I scanned one of the emails. It was from an HOA board member, instructing Dean to ensure compliance with parking codes, followed by a vague line about use your discretion for escalation. Claire's eyes were hard now. "Escalation," she repeated, like the word itself was poisonous. There was more. Dean had filed notes about several residents, complete with addresses, routines, and in some cases, financial details. It wasn't just parking violations. It was surveillance. "Why?" I asked. She tapped a finger on one of the emails. "Control. You create fear, you get compliance. And if they've got someone willing to pull a gun, fear becomes obedience." We drove back in silence, my mind replaying the way Dean's hand had moved for his weapon, the casual way he'd assumed he could scare her into submission. But Claire wasn't done. That afternoon, she went for a run. At least, that's what it would look like to anyone watching. In reality, she was mapping his patterns. By the time she returned, sweat glistening on her brow, she knew his schedule. "He's at a board member's house right now," she said, grabbing her keys. "We're going." The house was a sprawling 2-story at the far end of the neighborhood, the kind of place with perfectly symmetrical hedges and an oversized American flag out front. Dean's SUV was in the driveway. We parked a few houses down and approached on foot. Claire's steps were silent, deliberate. She guided us around to the side yard, where we could hear voices through an open window. "Told you she wouldn't be a problem." A man's voice said, one I didn't recognize. Dean's voice followed, lower but still edged with bravado. "She's mouthy, but she'll back down. They always do." Claire's lips twitched in something that wasn't quite a smile. "You keep this up," the other man said, "and the whole street will fall in line. We'll have this place cleaned up by summer." "Cleaned up," Dean repeated, and they both laughed. Claire pulled a tiny recorder from her pocket, clicked it on, and held it just under the windowsill. She didn't move until the conversation shifted to casual chatter about sports. Back in the car, she played the recording once, then tucked it away. "Now," she said, "we decide how to use this." I looked at her. "You're not going to the police?" "Not yet," she said. "The police will write it up, maybe slap him with a fine. Then they'll both walk away laughing. So what's the plan? Her gaze stayed on the road ahead. We take their control away. Publicly. Permanently. It wasn't a threat. It was a mission statement. And I knew from the way she said it that Marcus Dean's days of playing cop were numbered. 3 days later, the neighborhood looked the same. Kids pedaled past on bikes. Sprinklers hissed in the evening air. Porch lights flickered on one by one. But beneath the surface, everything had shifted. Claire had made sure of it. She'd spent those days quietly, almost invisibly, moving pieces into place. Every night she disappeared into her office for hours, the glow of her laptop spilling into the hall. In between, she made short, purposeful trips, dropping by the post office, the library, a coffee shop on the edge of town. Always alone, always returning with a look that told me the work was progressing. On the fourth night, she slid a flash drive across the kitchen table. "Everything's on here," she said simply. I plugged it into my laptop. Inside was a meticulous collection: audio recordings, email screenshots, scanned copies of the surveillance notes Dean had taken, and a list of HOA board members with their connections to the property management company. It was more than enough to prove a coordinated effort to intimidate residents. But the real gem was a short video. Grainy, but clear enough to see Dean in our driveway, pulling the gun on her. No sound, just the image. It had been captured by the tiny camera she planted in the mailbox post month ago, just in case. "Where did you get the rest of this?" I asked. Her eyes held mine for a beat. "You don't want to know." I believed her. The next morning, the first ripple hit. Every mailbox in the neighborhood had an unmarked envelope tucked inside. Inside each was a USB stick containing the video, the audio recording from the board member's house, and a short, anonymous note. "You deserve to know who's watching you. And why." By noon, the street was buzzing. Neighbors clustered in driveways, passing the sticks around, talking in hushed, urgent voices. Dean's SUV was conspicuously absent. That evening, Claire and I sat on the porch with coffee as a small group of residents approached. Their faces carried a mix of shock, anger, and something else, gratitude. "Did you?" One woman began, but stopped herself, eyes flicking toward Claire. Claire didn't confirm. She didn't deny. She just listened as they talked, their words tumbling out, stories of Dean showing up unannounced, issuing made-up fines, hinting at consequences for noncompliance. By the time they left, it was clear the illusion of his authority had shattered. The following day brought the second wave. Every local news station received an anonymous package containing the same evidence, along with a short press statement outlining the HOA's campaign of intimidation. They ran it as a lead story, the footage looping under bold headlines. HOA enforcer pulls gun on resident. No police authority. Reporters swarmed the property management office. The board issued a terse no comment. By afternoon, the company had released a statement distancing themselves from Dean, calling him a rogue contractor, and announcing an internal investigation. But Claire wasn't finished. That night, she made her final move. While the neighborhood slept, she slipped out, leaving a small, plain box on Dean's front porch. Inside was his own clipboard, the pages neatly stacked. Every single one had his notes on residents, now stamped in red ink with a single word: exposed. No threat, no name, just a reminder. By morning, Dean was gone. The SUV disappeared from the street. His house went dark. Some said he'd moved out overnight. Others whispered he'd skipped town entirely. The HOA board, under pressure from furious residents in the media spotlight, voted to dissolve their contract with the property management company. Several members resigned within the week. Life in the neighborhood returned to something like normal. The lawns were still perfect. The sprinklers still hissed. But there was a new undercurrent, a quiet awareness that the rules only mattered as long as people accepted them. One evening, a week after Dean vanished, Claire and I were sitting in the living room when she finally spoke about it. "You know why it worked?" she asked, her gaze distant. "Because you had proof?" She shook her head. "Because I didn't just take him down. I took away the fear he used to control people. Once they saw him for what he was, he couldn't hurt anyone anymore." I watched her for a moment, the way her shoulders had eased since that first night. What if he comes back? I asked. She smiled faintly. He won't. There was no bravado in her voice, just certainty. Outside, the street was quiet. Somewhere, a flag fluttered in the evening breeze. The world went on, but I knew the story of Marcus Dean would live here for a long time, in the glances neighbors exchange, in the way they now questioned every knock on the door. If you think this story was intense, you haven't heard the half of what's out there. Real power moves, real revenge, and real justice served cold. Subscribe to QAStories and turn on the bell, because the next story might just leave you speechless. Like, share, and let's keep these stories alive. And in the knowledge that when someone tried to rule this place through fear, they'd run headfirst into the wrong woman. Because my wife wasn't just another resident. She was Delta Force, and she was still deployed.